Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the learning of Torah Hashem, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbach, as we broadcast here from our flagship station at the Agudas Yisrael Beis Zev of Fairways Lakewood. As always, we thank TorahAnytime.com for the magnificent platform to teach Torah in 187 countries. We thank Kol HaLashon for their magnificent platform, and all the other places that carry our shiur, most recently YouTube. And tonight we have a very special sponsor, Moshe Weiss. My shiurim, which got sent and are sent all over the world, I used to send shiurim to Ozzy Weiss in Australia. Very fine gentleman. And his son, Moshe Weiss, gave a very beautiful dedication. Le'ilei Nishmas, his father, his Yotzei, the Chof Dalet Sivan, Eliezer Elia ben Mordechai. Eliezer Elia ben Mordechai, Ozzy Weiss from Australia. Zichron Levracha, Eschusi Yogan Aleinu, his neshama should have a lichtige Gan Eden. He should be a Melech Yosher for his family, for all of us, and all of Klal Yisrael. If you would like to sponsor a future share, 718-916-3100. That's 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. The Parsha, amongst all the other things that it discusses, and we've spoken in the past about the Meraglim and other important topics in this week's Parsha, you could find more shiurim on Shlach. I put some up on YouTube. You could find, I think, at least 3 years on TorahAnytime.com. This parsha contains the third parsha of Kriya Shema that we say twice a day, and that's the parsha of Tzitzis. The mitzvah of Tzitzis, in order to start getting excited about it, we have to know what the Vilna Gaon said. The Vilna Gaon said the value of moments in this world. He says in the next world, if you wanted to up your Olam Haba significantly by doing a mitzvah, you can't do it. Ameisim chofshim and mitzvahs. But in this world, for a matbeya ketana, for a small amount of money, a person could do a mitzvah that one can be zeicha, and he says one can be zeicha to the Madrega of Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina, to be able to be Zeicha to see the Shechina in the future world. And he says, what mitzvah is that? The mitzvah is Tzitzis. The guy is referring to a Gemara in Menachos, Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, where the great Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, says, Kol hazoris b'mitzvah zu, whoever is careful with the mitzvah and energetic with the mitzvah of tzitzis, zoicha u'mekabel pnei shechina. How do we know that? He says, well, it says in Kriya Shema, in the parsha of tzitzis, in this week's parsha, Uri'isa ma'isai, you should see the tzitzis. And it says, Es Hashem alikecha tira v'oso savayd. So that's the same word of Isai, Uri'isa ma'isai. If you're Isai savayd, if you serve Hashem with the Isai, with the tzitzis, you'll be Zaycha to Es Hashem Alikecha Tira. To see Hashem. Seeing Hashem is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The Mesilas Yesharim says, everything is in order to be Zaycha Lehanais Miziv Hashchina. The great pleasure of Tzadikim Yaishim and Vatroiseim Barashayim V'nen Miziv Hashchina. And therefore, it's a very worthwhile thing to deepen our understanding and meaning of this glorious mitzvah that equals the 613 mitzvahs. As it says, tzitzis is B'gematria 600, with the 5 knots and the 8 threads, that's 613. And Shkula Zachartem as Kol Mitzvahs Hashem. So let's start off with the Balaturim over here. The Balaturim says fascinating details. He says that the tzitzis are on the four corners of our garment, and the reason why the tzitzis are on the four corners of our garment is to remember that Hashem surrounds us from all four sides, from the north, the south, the west, and the east. And he says there's 5 knots that we should remember in all directions, our obligation for Chamisha Chumshei Torah, right? That's why we were created. And wherever we go, and whichever direction we go and look, we should know that we're bound by the mitzvahs of the Torah and by the expectation to learn Torah. And he says that we have in the tzitzis, in all four directions, 8 threads, so that we should be careful not to sin with the 8 vehicles that we could sin with. And those 8 vehicles, says the Balaturim, is the ear, the eyes, the mouth, the nose, the hands, the feet, the male organ, and the heart. So we have 8 threads to be careful not to sin with any of these 8 organs. It's interesting, he doesn't count the head, because the heart and the head is intertwined. And he says that when we protect these 8 vehicles from sin, then we're saved from 8 penalties: the chibut kever, suffering in the grave, and the 7 madregas of Ganem, and the 7 levels of Ganem. And then he says an interesting thing, and he says when we do the mitzvahs, we're zeicha to be above the 8 rekiyas, the 8 firmaments. It's interesting because we usually assume that there's 7, because that's what it says in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. When we have in mind echad, we should have in mind aleph is 1, ches over the 7 heavens and 1 earth, and dal the 4 directions. And we know it says 7 l'shainas in Yalav Yavai, that our tefillas should pierce the 7 heavens. But anyway, so he says 8 heavens. But even without that, we have a lot of significance over here, a lot of things to have in mind. To have in mind that the 4 corners are that Hashem is in all 4 directions. The 5 knots is, we should have in mind wherever we turn, our Chamisha Chumshei Torah. The 8 strings are the 8 organs the 8 vehicles that we protect from sin: the ear, the eyes, the nose, the hands, the feet, the male organ, the mouth, and the heart. And that we will be protected from the chibut kever, suffering in the grave, and the 7 levels of Gehenna, and we will rise over the 8 rekiyas. It's interesting that when it says that the tzitzis will save us from the 7 levels of hell, from the 7 madregas of hell, there's a very scary Maimer Chazal about anger. It says about anger, Kol HaKoyes, whoever gets angry, Kol Mine Gehenim Sholten Bai. Whoever gets angry, all the different treatments of hell will have to be used on him. Unfortunately, people that know from cancer, Lo Yaleinu, Lo Yalbanenu, there are many treatments. There's chemotherapy, there's immunotherapy, there's holistic medicine, there's stereotactic radiation, there's surgery, there's all kinds of treatments. In Gehenna, there are treatments for different sins. There's heat treatment, there's cold treatment, there's all kinds of treatments. Somebody gets angry will need all the treatments of hell. So it's interesting that he says that 8 threads protect us from Chibur HaKarka and the 7 levels of Gehenim, because it's brought down that the Chavetz Chaim said a skula not to become angry is to hold the tzitzis. So they bring down from the Chavetz Chaim. And I saw, interestingly enough, I saw that the Shlach Kaddish says that when it says you have the tzitzis al knaf, on the corner, he says knaf is b'gematria kas. Knaf is 150, right? Chaf is 20, nun is 50, is 70, pei is 80, is 150. And kas is 150, right? Chaf is 20, ayin is 70, that's 90, samach is 60, is 150. And perhaps that's the meaning of leisasuru akre levavchem. You shouldn't follow your heart. You shouldn't have a leiv roiges, an angry heart. And it's interesting. I remember they say over from Rav Steinman, that Rav Steinman, Zech Tzadik Levracha, Schusi Yagan Aleinu, said that they say that holding the tzitzis is a skula to ward off anger. He says, I have a better skula. He says, a skula not to get angry is to keep your mouth closed. That's what they say over for Rosh Steinman. Skula not to get angry is to keep your mouth closed. Now this is very interesting. The great Svardi Chacham. Where would we be without the Ben Ish Chai? Seichet Tzadik Vrachas Chusi Yagan Aleinu. The Ben Ish Chai says there's an interesting machlokes and kedushin between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says that when we do the will of Hashem, we're considered Hashem's children. We're considered Banim Atem LaHashem Alikeichem. But if we don't do the will of Hashem, then we're not considered like His children. That's, a little bit like we say on Rosh Hashanah, in Rosh Hashanah liturgy by Shofar, Im Kivanim, Im Kavodim. Whether we're viewed as children, or whether we're viewed as your servants. Rav Meir disagrees. Rav Meir says that Banim Atem LaHashem Alikeichem, you're always Hashem's children. It's like we say today, you got to give a love to children. No matter what, you got to give love. Rav Meir says, Banim Atem Benkach Ubenkach. It's interesting, on the Gemara in Kedushin, the great Rashba says that even though in Eruvin, the Gemara says usually when we have a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. But over here, the Rashba says that here we paskin like Rabbi Meir, that we're always considered Hashem's children, even if we're not behaving. It's a very beautiful thing. On this, the Ben Ish Chai applies it to tzitzis. And the Ben Ish Chai says that that's why we have 2 tzitzis in front and 2 tzitzis in the back. Of course, the tzitzis in the front represent when people are following the ways of Hashem. And they're seeing their tzitzis, uzachartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem. They remember the mitzvahs, v'asisem oisam, and they do them. The 2 tzitzis behind us represent the Jews that it's in the back. They don't follow it. And even they are considered children. And listen how does that connect to that we're still considered a ben. So here the Ben Ish Chai says a remarkable gematria. He says the 8 threads and the 5 knots is the gematria of echad, of 1, 13. 4 times 13 is 52. Right? 4 times 13 is 52. That's the gematria of ben. So the 4 sets of 8 threads and 5 knots is the gematria ben. To say that even those tzitzis that are behind us, we're still children of Hashem. And by the way, this also reminds you, it's important to keep 2 tzitzis behind and 2 tzitzis in front. Sometimes people are tucking in their tzitzis and they tuck it all in the front. That's no good. You have to have 2 tzitzis in the front two tzitzis in the back, and that's what it represents. It's interesting that the Ben Ish Chai says to have a nice pair of tzitzis is a schooler for a couple to have a son. Again, because of the same gematria. You shouldn't go after your heart. You shouldn't go after your eyes. Which a person tends to follow their eyes, to have roving eyes. Laman tizgru, in order that you should remember. They asked the Chofetz Chaim, how do I develop a good memory? You know, B'nai Yeshiva, and now anybody that learns, you know, they get very frustrated. We get frustrated. We learn something and then we forget it. We just learned Saita, and we come across a Gemara in Gittin about Saita, we don't remember the Gemara anymore. So they asked the Chofetz Chaim this same question. They asked the Kotzker Rebbe, how can I get to remember my learning? How can I get to remember my learning? So the Chofetz Chaim said, it says beferish in the pasuk. If you're going to be careful with Shmiras Einayim, then Laman Tizkeru, then you'll remember your learning. There's a scary Maisa with the Heilige Rebbe, the Yismach Yisrael from Alexander. This, I know this story because it was reported by his devoted Shamish, Rameir Elbaim, and it's quoted, the story is quoted in the Sefer Mesikas HaTorah. Said there were a bunch of people that came in one after another with kvitlach, and a person went in and asked the Rebbe for a skula for Zikaron, and the Rebbe gave him a skula. So the person behind him said, Rebbe, I also want a skula for Zikaron. So he looked at the person and he said, for you I have a different skula. For you the skula is Loisasuru Achrei Levavchem Achrei Nechem Laman Tizkru. And then the Rebbe said an interesting thing. And if you wonder how I could tell you that in front of people, and although he doesn't elaborate, but I think what he meant is I just embarrassed you in front of people. I told you that you shouldn't let your eyes look at things that they're not supposed to, and then you'll remember. So you'll say, how could I do that? So he said to him, you should know, before I came a Rebbe, I was mafkir my olam haba in order to help Yidden. Obviously, I mean, I shouldn't say obviously, but it seems to be that the Rebbe felt that if he would tell this to him in front of other people, it would be more of a reason for him to repair what the Rebbe noticed, that he had eyes that looked around at things that he was not supposed to. Over here, there's a clear message that in order to have a good memory, a person should be careful, which is a big challenge in our society today, to not look at what you're not supposed to look at. People have phones and they scroll down innocently and they're confronted by all kinds of pictures that they shouldn't be looking at. People go into the streets and they see things that they shouldn't look at. Especially people go in the summer and they sit down in malls and they're bombarded by people that are hardly dressed. So a person has to be aware. Agav, before, I don't want to get into too much of an aside, but we're talking about Zikaron. I remember that I was sitting with Rav Moshe, and the Bacher came in and asked Rav Moshe how he could develop a good memory. So Ramosha told him, do you remember anything from your youth when you were a little boy? So the Bacher said, yes, I remember I once touched the steam, the heater, and I got a burn when I was like 2 years old. So Ramosha told him the reason why you remember that is because it made a big impression upon you. We have to work on being machshiv our learning, that it's Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. It's the biggest thing that we could do with our life. It's the purpose of our existence. It's nitzchias. And if it makes a big impression upon us, we'll remember it better. Also, we should mention that Rashi in Masechtas Avodah Zarah in the first parak says that to remember things, we should have in mind at the brach of Atochainen in Shemona Esrei to remember our learning. Now, in regard to Shmiras Einayim, it was the minig of Ramosha that when he said Re'isem Oisai, he took his tzitzis and brought it to his eyes, touched his eyes. And that's brought down in the Beis Yosef, in the Ber Heitev, and in the Mishnah Brura, that if you're maver the tzitzis by your eyes in the Parsha of Kriyashma, of Vayomer, you'll be protected from, we will be protected from becoming blind, which is, of course, a very big skula, a very wonderful thing. But I saw brought down in the Sefer Hanhogas Tzadikim from the Heilige Korban Nisanel, that the Korban Nisanel said that there's a minig that when you say Leisasuru Achrei Levavchem V'Achrei Einechem, when you say the words Achrei Einechem, you should also touch your eyes, and that will help to chase away Legare Shatuma Einayim. Really, really interesting. And also, I'd like to add that by doing this, it says Adam Nifal Kafi Pulaisam. So if you do something to be Megarish Tumah from your eyes, it'll help you feel to work on this. So we know it says V'leisasuru achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem. You shouldn't follow after your heart and after your eyes. So there's an obvious question, which is it's so obvious. It seems to be very out of order, because the normal order is ayin roya v'leiv kaimed. The eye sees and then the heart desires. So it should say v'leisasuru achrei einechem v'achrei levavchem. Why does it say Loisasura Achrei Levavchem V'Achrei Einechem? So Rav Leibel Katz in the Oyel Aryeh says a very interesting thing. He says that today people are persuaded by their environment, by their colleagues, by their associates. You know, you got to look at this. You gotta watch this. You gotta go there. So here's a person that on his own, he would never think to go to Aruba. What's in Aruba? Beaches with all kinds of, I was never there, but all kinds of immodest women. He would never think of going on a Goyish cruise where people are walking around. He would never think of going to a place where there's a unsegregated water park. He would never think about watching something that is so unfiltered. And people say, yeah, everybody sees it, everybody goes there, everybody does it. So don't follow your heart that wants to do like everybody else, which will lead you to follow your eyes. That's the way the great Rabbi Leibel Katz, who had so much experience in the taivas of people. Of course, there's another answer to this question, and that is that You're on the street. You're not very responsible for your first look. You can't help it. But are you going to take another look? Are you going to turn around to look back? Don't go after your heart. To take another look. That's why it doesn't say the first look you can't be held responsible for. But once you saw that first look, don't follow your heart to take another look. That's why it says it in that order. You know, when we talk about the temptation to look, I want to share with the Olam from the master of mitzvahs, from the chinuch, or Yesod Gadol. The chinuch gives tremendous chizik. This chinuch is in the mitzvah of tzitzis, mitzvah shim pei zayin. He says we should know that averis feed on averis, and mitzvahs feed on mitzvahs. So if a person gets in the habit to stop and look at pictures, then they're going to look at more. Averi gereres averi. But he gives a big chizik. He says as follows. Mitzvah gereres mitzvah. V'im tiske liyos gibar ba'aretz. If you merit to be mighty, remember, he's a gibar, koivish, it's a very odd thing. People relax when they look. They get a good feeling. They get a thrill. Im tiske liyos gibar ba'aretz. Lich baish yitzricha. To conquer your etzer. One time you said, you know what? I'm not going to look. That will fuel you and make it easier the next time and many times afterwards. So you don't have to think about making a sweeping decision. Control yourself once. Once you control yourself once and say, then it's going to be easier. Says the chinuch, the master of the mitzvahs, mitzvah gereres mitzvah, and it's going to be easier after that. And it's interesting, I told you this before, that the Shomer Amunim Rav said that once you control yourself and you don't look, and you turn away, it's an ace ratzon, and at that time you could ask Hashem something. You know somebody that needs a refuah shalema, you avoided looking, and now Hashem said, help this chayla, mention him and his father's name, help this chayla, his mother's name, help this chayla have a refuah shalema and the schus of my gevura. Now, we asked why it says levavchem before einechem. Really, there's another reason. And that is that the Gemara says Achrei Levavchem is referring to something else. V'lo yisasuru Achrei Levavchem zu minas. That's heresy. Achrei einechem, and after the eyes, zu gilui aroyos. That's taiva. That's immorality. So on this, the great Rav Elchanan Vatzman, you know, when we mention Rav Elchanan, you know, it says Sifsais of Daivavais bekever. His lips move in the kever. His kever is in Auschwitz. Hashem yinkim damai. It's such a schus that we could talk the words of Torah of a man who was safe in America and went back to be the captain of his ship in Baranovich and went to his death to be with his people. So Rabbi Elchanan asks an interesting question. He says, heresy is not a taiva of the lave. It's something to do with the head, with the intellect. So it should say v'lo yisasuru achrei haraish, not achrei halev. Taiva is the heart, but heresy is an intellectual mistake. Somebody says they're an atheist. That's a mistake of the head. So why does it say lo yisasuru achrei levavcha? And Rav Elchanan says something very sharp here. Rav Elchanan says, nobody makes a mistake to believe in atheism. That's not an intellectual decision. The Gemara tells us, Rav Elchanan quotes, the Gemara tells us that a heretic, said to Rabbi Akiva, Mi bara olam, who created the world? So Rabbi Akiva said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Amalei, so the heretic said, Herali davar bara, show me clear proof. So Rabbi Akiva said to the Talmidim, just like a intricate piece of clothing shows us that there was a embroider, and just like a sophisticated house shows us that there was a builder, so the complex world shows us that there's a creator. So that's a double person. Nobody would say, well, this house, it came by itself. To say that the world with all its complexities came by itself, you know, they made up a euphemism. They tell children in school, Mother Nature did this, Mother Nature did that. They don't want to say God. On the other hand, they don't want to say accident did this. So they came up with Mother Nature. Nobody would, it's like I tell somebody, there's over 100 buttons in the elevator in the Empire State Building. Somebody would tell you, though, they brought a box of buttons and they threw it against the wall of the elevator, and it all came by accident in the right order, perfectly placed on the wall. They would tell you there's a place for you. It's called Bellevue. The intricacies of just one baby born, the intricacies of the human eye, the balance system in the inner ear, to say that these were accidents is the words of a raving lunatic. So Rabbi Elchanan said, people don't follow heresy because of intellect, but rather their heart desires freedom from restrictions, especially when they see in the environment. They want to have all of the pleasures. They want to indulge in all sexual persuasions. And the only way they could do that is if they say that there's no God that gives rules. So they're not bound to any God. So it's their desires for unfettered desire that causes them to make these decisions. And that's what the Gemara tells us. It's a Gemara. It's interesting how the Gemara tells us that of the Yisrael Avodah Zarah, even when Yisrael did idolatry, what are they? Worshipping stones? Ayin lahem v'lo yiru, eyes that can't see, right? Peh lahem v'lo yidaberu, a mouth that can't speak. Even worshipping by defecating in front of Pa'ar, going to the bathroom. In order that they could do freely, publicly, immorality. If you accept all of the pagan gods of Greece, then you could do all their vices, incest and homosexuality, and all kinds of deviations that the gods themselves were ascribed at doing. So this is, says Rabbi Elchanan, this is not following the head, it's following the heart. We're talking about the school of tzitzis, that it saves from kas, it protects from blindness, it could help push away untoward things from our eyes. It's interesting that it's brought down that when we make the bracha on tzitzis, it says the bracha is lisatef batzitzis, to robe ourselves, to wrap ourselves in the tzitzis. It's Rosh Tevis, lisatef batzitzis is Rosh Tevis Lamed Beis, 32, because there are 32 teeth, and it's a skula to have healthy teeth, to be careful with the mitzvah of talis. The Kedushas Levi, the Heilige Reb Levi Yitzchak Meberditcheva, says an interesting thing. He says that when we're about to put on the talis, and we take our tzitzis and we separate them, they say over that the word tzitzis is an acronym for Tzadik Yafrid Tzitziyos Tamid. The righteous person separates his tzitzis all the time. It says when a person is about to wrap himself with his talis, he says the malachim and the srafim in Shemayim gather, and they say this person is about to make the bracha on the tzitzis. That's how much it's appreciated in the heavenly realm. It's a great imagery. Another kavanah when putting on the tzitzis. Interesting kavanah. Kavanah when putting on the tzitzis, it says in the pasuk, Laman tizkuru, that you should remember, vasisem es kol mitzvosai, and then v'yisem kedoshim le'elokechem. You'll be holy to Hashem. So the Al-Shich HaKadosh, the holy Al-Shich, Zech Tzadik L'Vracha, Zchus Yagim Aleinu, in his Sefer Torahs Moshe, the Al-Shich says that we know that we have Ramach Evarim, 248 limbs, Shin Samach Gidim, the 365 sinews that make up a body. And they represent, they correspond to the 248 positive commandments and the 365 negative commandments. By doing the 613 mitzvahs, we infuse Kedusha in our whole body. But says the Al-Shich, there's many mitzvahs today that we can't do. Actually, of the 613 mitzvahs, we only have actively, Chavetz Chaim says, Puz 87. We're missing a lot of mitzvahs. We can't bring karbanas. There's so many mitzvahs that we don't have. So how do we here in Chutzarts, we don't have Shemitah, we don't have Truma Maisers, we don't have Maiser Sheni, there's so many mitzvahs that we don't have mitzvah of giving the Matnas Kahuna, the Reishis Hagez, the first of the fleece, the Zroy Al Chayayim Vakeva, the right foreleg, the more, the cheeks, so many mitzvahs that we don't have. We don't have redeeming a firstborn donkey. We don't have bringing the bechor of an animal to the base of Mikdash. We don't have Meiser Behema. So many mitzvahs that we don't. How do we get the Kedusha? We're missing all these mitzvahs. So the Al-Shich says when we hold the tzitzis over ourselves, we say Hashem, the tzitzis corresponds to 613. I want you to know I really want to do Shemitah. I really want to build a parapet. I have a slanted roof, but I really want to do these mitzvahs. I'm an Einus. It says Chishav Lasis Mitzvah and Menenis. It's as if we did it. And then the Al-Shich says when we have these kavanas that we want to do all these mitzvahs, Machshava Tova HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mitzvah L'Mais, he says that's the pshat in the pasuk. L'man tizkur, you should remember. V'asisem es kol mitzvosai, then it's considered as if you did all my mitzvahs, v'yisem kedoshim, and you received the kedusha in all your evarim. It's important to have in mind, I've said this many times, the Chayzim of Lublin, the famous seer of Lublin, was a Moyel. They asked the Chayzim what was the best meal he ever did. He says, there was once a snowstorm, and I tried valiantly to do it. I couldn't get there. So they said, the best meal you ever did is the one you didn't do? He said, yeah. Because it says, Chishav Lasais mitzvah, if you want to do a mitzvah of bananas, Hashem considers as if you did it. But how does Hashem consider as if you did it? He takes an average of all your brisket. He considers if you did it the right way. So, Hashem considers the right way. That's better than anything I ever did. So when we take that mitzvah, tzitzis, it's something to have in mind. I want to do all the mitzvahs, Hashem. I really want to keep Shemitah. I really do. I really would love to give my Yisrael. I really love to give Reishis, I guess. I'd really love to. I can't. I don't live in Eretz Yisrael. We don't have it nowadays. I'd really like to go to the base of English and bring a shlamim. I really would like to fulfill the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel. Could have in mind different mitzvahs, different days. And then Hashem considers it as if we did it. It's a very powerful Al Shech HaKadosh. Now, as we I made a bracha already, Rabbi say. As we analyze the mitzvah of tzitzis, there is a rather mystifying and perplexing Rashi. Rashi tells us that the 8 threads on the tzitzis corresponds to the 8 days that Klal Yisrael waited from when they left Egypt until they sang Az Yasher by the Yam. It's a famous Rashi. The tremendous problem is, as the Chassam Sofer asks, it wasn't 8 days. We know that's why we have Shvi Shel Pesach, 7 days. Because from Yetzias Mitzrayim till when we crossed the Yam Suf was 7 days. That's why it's called Shvi Shel Pesach. So how could Rashi say we have 8 threads from when we left Mitzrayim until we sang by the Yam? We sang by the Yam on the 7th day. So the Chassam Sofer is so troubled by this question that the Chassam Sofer suggests that there's a Toy Sofer in the Rashi that we have, and it really is supposed to say that there's 7 threads corresponding to the 7 days. And it means the 7 white threads, because they used to have 1 thread of tchelis and 7 threads of white. So the 7 threads of white correspond to the 7 days. It's a really amazing Chassam Sofer. The Heilige Rabbi Yisachar Dov Mibels, Zecher Tzad V'Kodesh Rach Schus Yogan Aleinu. Same thing for the Chassam Sofer Avada. The Heilige Rabbi Yisachar Dov Mibels, he gives 2 magnificent pshatim on this Rashi. One pshat that the Rabbi Yisachar Dov Mibels says is that, remember we said that how come we have so many mitzvahs on Pesach in the night? Usually all mitzvahs are day-based. A little bit of esrog has to be during the day, right? We need to do a little bit of esrog in the day. Shofar has to be in the day, right? The mitzvahs have to be in the day. The Sudas Purim has to be in the day. May Mishta V'Simcha Mishloach Manos Yisrael Matan Slav Yain Mishalch Manos Matan Sivan has to be in the day. How come Pesach is in the night? So we said, it says that they smelled the smell of the current Pesach and they mauled themselves. How can they maul themselves in the night? So Hashem made a miracle. V'layla ki yom yair. That night was lit up like day. That's how they were able to do the Milah. And that's one of the meaning of Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylas. How different is this night? It's different. It was day. So says Rabbi Yisachar Dov Mibel, so that night is counted like another day. And then there was 8 days. That day, and the next day, and the 7 days gives us 8 days. That's one teretz that Rabbi Yisachar Dov Mibel gives in Rashi. He gives another remarkable teretz from the famous Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says that when it says Va'esa eschem al kanfei nesharim, that on the night of on the Erev Pesach, before Makas B'chayris, Hashem took us al kanfei nesharim, or in the words of some of the Rishonim, He took us with the Anoni HaKavod and took us to Eretz Yisrael, and we shechted the Korban Pesach in Eretz Yisrael at the Mokem HaMikdash, and then He brought us back to Mitzrayim, and we put it on the doorposts. And therefore, when it says in Rashi that it's 8 days from the day that we left, it meant from the day Erev Pesach when we left Eretz Yisrael, which would make it 8 days till when we sang at the Yam Suf. We always say this is a remarkable Targum Yonasan ben Uziel because it means that Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam and the Dardeya were Zoicha at least to enter Eretz Yisrael once with this miraculous trip. And that would be the 8 days. Two beautiful pshatim from the Heilige Belzer Rebbe, Rabbi Yisachar Dov, Zechat Tzav V'Kodesh V'Racha, Schusser Yagan Aleinu. There's another, I didn't even write it down in my notes, but I see I'm going to have a little bit more time before I get to 2 more subjects that I want to talk about. Again, we want to remind you that if you would like to support this share, next week we don't have a sponsor, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Again, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Ramosha asks a very fundamental question on the tchelis. Tchelis, the blue dye from the chalazine, which was used to dye one thread. So it says that the dye was a type of bluish color, or turquoise, similar to the sea, and the sea was similar to the sky, and the sky was similar to sapphire, and sapphire is similar to Kisei HaKavod, in order to get us to remember Uzachartem as Kol Mitzvahs Hashem. So Ramosha asked, why doesn't it simply say that the Tchelis is doimer to the Kisei HaKavod? And Ramosha gives an answer. It comes to teach us that we can't jump all the way to the highest level, but we have to go slowly, step by step. Don't try to rocket all the way up in one shot. Rabbi Leibel Katz says that that's why in the vision of Yaakov there was a ladder. Because when you want to go up from earth to heaven, you have to take steps. You can't do it all in one shot. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, it's interesting, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, when speaking about this, he said that it says, Vayishalech Hanoch Esa Elikim Veinenu. Hanoch walked with Hashem, and he's gone. Ki lokach oisay Elikim. So Rabbi Yaakov says, because he walked with God, that's a reason to take him away. To the contrary, we say that when a person lives properly, Hashem says, I want this person here a long time. This is the reason I created the world. So Rabbi Yaakov said, Chanoich leaped to the zenith. Right away, he reached the pinnacle. And from there, it's only down from there. So Hashem took him away before he could fall down. So Rabbi Yaakov said, don't jump. Go slowly, step by step. You're people that make up their mind that they're going to have kavanah and davening, and then they think they're going to go from nothing to everything in one shot. Then they'll surely fall. Start, little by little. It's the same thing with everything. Here's a person that's having problems in his marriage. He wants to change everything. Don't start little. Take baby steps. I don't mean that person should do something wrong. I'm saying you want to make improvements? Start slowly. Slowly. Build on it. Don't try to jump all the way. That's why it says the tchelis is like the sea is like the sky is like sapphire. These are slowly. Very interesting thought from Ramesha. Now we know that it says that when we wrap the talis on ourselves, so we do it katifas yishmaelim, like the wrapping of the Arabs. So the many people take the talis and they cover their heads completely. It's well known that the Minchas Elazar, the Minchas Rebbe Zech Tzadik Nevrachas Chusad Hagan Aleinu, in the Mukei Arachayim, writes that can't be pshat. You think the Yishmaelim walked around with the talis covering their head and their eyes? How did they see? So he writes just to take the talis and throw all four tzitzis to the left, like it says in the Menhag Arizal, and cover the neck and the mouth, but that's it. There's a famous letter from Rameir Shapiro to the Minchas Elazar, where Rameir Shapiro writes that when he got the Minchas Elazar's Nimukei Arachayim, it filled him with joy. Because on the first day after he got married, his father showed him how to put on the talis, but he told him not to cover his head. And Rameir Shapiro, who knew the Mefarshim, the Paiskim, who saw it says to cover the head, he was distressed, but he felt he couldn't follow his father connected the Paiskim. And he writes to the Minchas Elazar, when he saw what he wrote, he was filled with joy, and he started following then what his father taught him. They say the Minchas Elazar said when he went to Eretz Yisrael, besides he wanted to see the Heilige Saba, Rav Alapandri, but he said it was worth going to Eretz Yisrael just to see that the Yishmaelim didn't cover their whole head. So the Mechaber of the Eitzah Plois Ala Torah writes that when he saw the Minchas Rebbe now, the Minchas Rebbe said he has this letter from Rameir Shapiro, but he wondered about the fact that although the letter was written officially like regular responsa, he was wondered why it didn't have a date. People that send shuvas between one gadol to another, it's always dated, and it didn't have a date. So it was a mystery. So they met the brother of Rameir Shapiro, who lived in Borough Park for a while, Rav Avram Shapiro, and they asked him if he knows anything about this letter. He says, yes. So he says, do you have any idea why your brother didn't write a date? He says, I actually do. It's an unbelievable story. So you see, my brother's minig, after he introduced the Daf HaYomi, he wrote, instead of the date, he wrote the Daf. Right? Like today, it would say, Gittin, Daf Chav Tes, whichever Malzer of the Daf HaYomi it is, the 13th Malzer, said Gittin Daf Chav Tes. That's how he would date it. He said he knew that the Minchas Elazar wasn't a big proponent of the Daf Yomi, so he didn't want to do that because he didn't want to cause any friction. On the other hand, he didn't want to write the date and depart from his custom, so he said Shebal Tasa Shani, and he didn't write anything. What's beautiful about this story is, first of all, you see the respect, even though by Rameir Shapiro, the Daf Yomi was one of his life's essence. He still didn't push it on anybody. And he had the sensitivity to not do it, even though it would be okay, it's his thing, it's his minig, he's writing the letter, but he left it out. So as that there should be divrei shalom be'emes. And to see how exact, how they measured their every word, their every detail. Remember we said, Shekol HaTorah kula nitna la'asa shalom ba'olam. Now, as to the minig of an Torah, interesting. I wear an Torah. My father, Olav Shalom, wore an Torah. Some people will not wear an Torah. Now, the Magen Avram brings down from the Shlach Gems that since you want to put the tzitzis that are always on the head, which is more chashiv, always on the head, and not sometimes on the head, sometimes below. So you put an Torah by the head that you should always recognize these two tzitzis, this part was always by the head. Also, it's brought down that because the head has sweat, so they put something heavier so that the beged shouldn't get worn out. On the other hand, the Levush says that he doesn't like the minik, because by putting something on the head, it makes it look more like a kisi aroish, like a beged for the head. And a beged for the head doesn't need tzitzis. And that's why the Malbim brings down that the minig in Poland was to wear an Torah, but also you'll see some people have an Torah in the middle also. So that it should be something on the other part of the towels, so nobody should say that it's just the kisi aroish. The Aruch HaShulchan is against, so we find different minhagim, and everybody should do the way that their parents gave to them. Now, of course, Rabbi said we had a share now, basically on tzitzis. You should know we just touched the surface. There's so much more. Enjoy looking into it. Enjoy deepening your appreciation of this mitzvah, that it says that we're going to be zeicha to 700 servants, 10 from each of the Shivim Umais, for each corner, 2,800 servants just for this mitzvah. Such a chashuv mitzvah. It should be a protection for us. It should be a pride for us that we're from the Tzva Hashem, from the army of Hashem. I want to thank you all for joining us and wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.